Hey, thanks for joining me. Clint Mason here, Kaizen Well Solutions. Going to talk a little bit about removing a plunger from your wellhead or your lubricator, and just a couple of issues. And the main thing I'm going to talk about is the steps I go through when I go to a well that I have no experience with. How do I make sure that I'm safe and I've done everything I can to understand what's going on inside that lubricator? So some risk when we're removing a plunger from a lubricator. Hydrates. A lot of wells are high pressure now. Gapple, horizontal wells, hydrates has become a big issue in a lot of these wells, and especially when we get gapple wells where you've got a lot of high flow rates and cooling from gas injection and things like that. We don't know what the master valve, wing valve conditions are. We don't know if there's trapped pressure pockets. Maybe they are in hydrates or ice or wax or whatever. The chemicals that are being pumped in, the toxins, poisons, oxidizers, environmentally damaging chemicals we got to be aware of. Make sure when we go there, we shut off all pumps and anything that could be injecting those chemicals before we work on them. And of course, hazardous gases and liquids like H2S. So some pretty basic stuff that we need to look at before we do anything in that well. So let's talk about catchers first so you understand how they work and the concerns I have when using them. So catcher operates pretty basic. So you turn the handle in, and really what happens is that handle's turning in, it's compressing these little springs. And this little spring puts pressure on a little button or poppet or whatever you want to call it, and that poppet pushes over here against the plunger. So the only force holding that plunger in place is the spring tension uh, on that poppet. Okay, so it's not a positive lock, if you want to put it that way. This would never become positive because if you turn this into the point where you fully compress that spring, if you tried to bring a plunger up in that condition, of course it would hit that poppet and probably damage the poppet or the button and wouldn't catch it and put a lot of stress in this area. So remember, the only thing holding that plunger in place is some little tiny spring that you don't have any clue what kind of condition it's in. So, so we'll go to the next slide here. So I'm going to hide my picture here while we're talking about this, but we're trying to here. There we go. Let's see if I can do that. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not a problem. So steps to remove the plunger. All right. The very first step we're going to go through is we're going to set this catcher, which we have. We're going to wait for that plunger to come to surface, which it has. It's up here now. Then we're going to close our wing valve. See our wing valve closing. Then we're going to close our master valve. So I always close the top one first and the lower one second. That way your bottom valve is always kept in best shape. The thing I do that a lot of people don't and ask questions about is I actually release the plunger and let it drop on the master valve. Now this is before I've taken any pressure off of the wellhead at all. So it's all pressured. All I've done is close the valves, caught the plunger, and basically I open the catcher and I let it fall down on top of the master valve. Then I go and I bleed the lubricator off. And I hopefully we have 2 points, one upper, one lower. That's always the best thing you can do. But if not, at least have the 1 point. So we've cracked that pressure. Now I'm going to actually crack open that wing valve a little bit just to let some gas flow back. And I'm going to make sure gas flows out my needle valves or my ports. All right. And then I'm going to, of course, close that wing valve, and then I'm going to crack open the master valves, just enough to let a little bit of gas flow back. Okay. And again, I'm going to make sure I get flow through both or my bleed valves. Then, of course, close the master valve. Now, note you leave the bleed valves open now at this point. So here we go. Now, to this point, what have we confirmed? Well, By catching the plunger, we confirm that it was in the lubricator, so we know where it is and we can close the valve. That means it's not going to be in the master valve. It's not going to be in the way we're holding it up. But by releasing the plunger and letting it fall down on the master gate valve, we now know that the plunger is not stuck on wax or ice or hydrates, and it's moving freely in the wellhead. So it's kind of key to know that, because if the plunger doesn't drop when you release it, it means it's hung up on something. So it could be any of these things in there. So right away, you know, oops, I got to do something. I got something in here that is hanging up that plunger, which could also be trapping or holding pressure. All right. So it's sitting down on the master valve. The other reason why we've got it down there is it's not going to fall unexpectedly. Now remember, the catcher is a spring. We don't know the condition. You know, we're spinning the cap off, and we almost got it off, or we got it off, and we're taking the top spring and disc out, and all of a sudden, with us messing around, the plunger slips out, and that plunger falls, and now it smacks the top of the gate valve. Now I'm going to talk more about gate valves and some of the dangers by doing that. But if you hit a gate valve, and depending on, well, any gate valve with a plunger, and if it falls, a couple of feet out of the lubricator and smacks the top of the gate valve, and it's possible that you can actually make the gate shift or move a little bit, which will allow pressure to come around the gate and under the plunger and blow the plunger back out. And I'll explain that a little bit more on the different types of gate valves and where we see it, and you may be surprised. But anyways, so the fact is that we have gone and we got it on the gate. It will not fall unexpectedly, striking the master valve. And after the first venting of pressure, by cracking open and venting the wing valve, we know that the pathway from the gate of the wing valve to the port is clear, or it's at least there's no trap pressure because it's flowed through there, right? So we've confirmed there's no hydrates, or there shouldn't be any hydrates at that point. And then by cracking the master valves, we're ensuring that there's no trap pressure between the master valve and the vent points. So now our whole lubricator, we've checked all sides, the flow paths, and in my animation, I'm showing one of our radial flow. But if you're using a standard lubricator where you have two outlets, a lower and an upper, you actually have to check both of those wing valves, not just a single one, just to bring that point up and make sure both sides are clear when you're doing that bleed down. So here we are. We've cracked and vented the master valves. We know the pathways from the motor, from the master valve to the vent points is not blocked, holding pressure or whatever. So I feel pretty good at this point that I don't have any unknown trap pressures, and I should be pretty safe. So the removal of the bowl and cap. Now there's EUE threads, and we can talk about that, but this is our lubricators are all bow and top. The majority of the new lubricators coming out are bow and top. It's a much better thread and a much better cap. It's much stronger than EUEs. But anyways, the removal of the bow and cap. Never use a pipe wrench on the nut, okay, or snipe on the handles. We used to get calls all the time about guys, oh, well, they broke the handles off. We hit them with a hammer. We put pipes on them. We put pipe wrenches on. You know what? If you're doing that, you are really doing something wrong. And basically, if you snap a handle out of a bone nut, or you put a big pipe wrench on and scar it all up, you've basically destroyed that nut. More with the handles than if you just scar it up. If you scar it up with a big wrench, what you've done is created something to cut your hands up on later. Your buddy's going to get hurt. So you know what? If a pipe wrench or a snipe on the handles is not something we should ever be considering. Okay. The other thing is, before we do anything, inspect the cap for lock bolts on the cap that stops it from turning off. There's a couple of companies, mine included, where we actually put little bolts that sit underneath the main bone, and you just spin them in and suck them up a little, snug them up, and that way there's no way for that cap to accidentally be backed off. But if you go to take it off, you got to spin those bolts out. They're just little 3/8 bolts in ours, regular bolts, and you spin it off, and it's gone. So the first thing is to make sure they're not there. If the top will not move after you've taken those little bolts out, you got to check for trap pressure and follow the steps from step 5 on the prior slide. So in our prior slide, we went through all those steps and we made sure the plunger moved, we bled everything down. Okay, so we've confirmed again that there's no trap pressure. Well, really, at that point, if we can't move that bow and nut, we need to get a proper bow and nut wrencher. We should have one. Okay, and if you don't know what that is, contact me. You can buy them from different places. I think NOV's got them, different buddy. We just buy them from some of those suppliers as well, so you can get them directly. And those are designed to hook into a little hole that's in the side, and it's like a big C, and you can actually kind of smack it and snap it free. One of the main reasons why bow and nuts are hard to take off is people spin them all the way down, and then when they get them down where they're tight, they give them that extra little smack, and they actually kind of lock them, and that's completely wrong. The proper way to set or put a bow and nut on is you spin it down until it touches, and you turn it basically a quarter turn back, and then you should set whatever your locks are or something to make sure it can't turn. But when there's pressure on that nut, you can't turn those threads. I mean, more than 20-30 psi, that thing is, there's so much thread face touching it. They're pretty solid. So that's why if you can't get the top off, you got to be, okay, well, what's going on here? We got pressure trapped, or we got, maybe the spring somehow got damaged and now it's jammed up there in full compression of that spring on the nut. There could be something going on. So you got to get rid of all of those possibilities before you get in there and get too aggressive on taking the cap off. So where was I? Oh yeah, for the proper bow and nut wrench, you should have one, should get one. If you don't have the proper bow and nut removal wrench, what I'll do, long before I grab a snipe or pull on the handles or whatever, is I'll go get a couple of brass hammers so they're not sparking, and I just will tap the nut all the way around it. Just tap on either side. Give it a few smacks. You don't have to get crazy. You don't need to dent but just smack it. And sometimes if there's a little bit of rust buildup, that'll break it free. And then you'll be able to spin it off. And the other thing you can do is you can take a little bit of light oil and basically pour it along the top edge, and that'll let the oil get down around the threads. If someone's putting these nuts together properly, they're properly greasing them, and you're inspecting your well heads every 3 to 6 months, you should never, and they're not tightening putting that last smack into that bow on top, these things should come off super easy. You should never have a problem. If you're struggling with caps, there's a process that you're not following, and that's either you're not greasing them. Oh, and when I say grease, I mean grease, not pipe dope, not copper coat, none of that stuff, none of the, not nickel coat. You put a proper grease that's non-reactive to the gas. So if you got H2S, you got to have a non-reactive grease to H2S in your gas and things like that. You should have all that, and it'll be better. And I typically just use lithium, like white lithium grease, and that's typically what we use, and it keeps the nuts very free. Usually don't have a problem. So anyways, we've gone through all this. We've gone through all these steps. We know we don't have pressure. We know we don't have anything issues. We finally get the cap loose because somebody over tightened it, but we got through it. So if the nut turns, go to step 8, okay? And again, if it doesn't turn, go back through 1 to 4 one more time. The point, if you snipes on the handles or pipe wrenches, again, you're going to damage the nut. So don't do it. Okay, number 8. So if the nut turns, and there will likely be some resistance, because if like in ours and most people, if they use springs, or even PCS who uses the rubber or the poly springs, they're actually preloaded. So there's a bit of a compression on that assembly when you get those bow and tops down tight. So when you first go to turn them off, those forces are making the threads drag a little bit. So you might get 1.5 or let's say 2-ish turns, and it may be kind of stiff and dragging a little bit. But once you take that preload off from the spring, which should be in that those 2-ish turns, it should spin very easy. It should be very light. The only drag you might get is a little bit from the O-ring as it's sliding out, but there shouldn't be much resistance. There's lots of resistance. you got to stop and reevaluate. That resistance is probably caused by forces on that cap or something, putting those threads in a bind. So you got to go through it. So, um, so anyways, after 2 turns, so we say we get all through that. We don't have any resistance after 2. It spins off nice. And now we've got the cap and the spring and everything. And just to note, the cap and the nuts can be real heavy. So I've watched guys stand up on, standing on the wing valve, or sorry, on the casing valve, 1 foot on the valve, balancing with the other one, trying to hold these and spin them off. It's crazy. You got to have proper footing, and you got to use both hands, because if you drop one of these, you're gonna, if you don't drop it on your foot or on your head or something, or you hurt yourself or fall off the wellhead, you're going to drop it on the needle valve or some on the casing and break that off, or something's going to happen. So just make sure you have proper footing, use both hands, and you should have a place where you can set the cap that's stable, like on a platform or a ladder, not a ladder, but a platform beside your wellhead. If it's a short enough well, obviously you can stand beside it and put it on the on the ground or whatever. But once it's removed, it's good. So some hidden dangers in the wellhead. So let's get back to some of the reasons why I do things like drop the plunger. And we explained that if the plunger moves, we know it's not hung up in hydrate, blah, blah, blah. And the other thing about how, it could strike the master valve and unseat it. I'm going to explain that a little bit better. But anyways, in our previous steps, we were able to confirm the plunger moved. There's no communication. So really, I'm pretty confident that there's not going to be a hydrate that's going to hold or trap pressure, and it's very low at this point. Remember, there always comes up, but the question when I'm doing this presentation always comes up, saying, "Hey man, you can't drop a plunger on a gate valve. You're going to damage it and blah 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 and all that stuff." Well, first thing to remember is never drop the plunger on the gate valve after you've taken the pressure off it. Only you leave the pressure on, then you drop the plunger, then you depressure it. And let me explain why I do this. There's kind of like 3 typical gate valves out there, and honestly, I don't know. I'm no valve expert, and I don't know which one is which, but I have been told that and here, and this is a not a valve training course, by the way. The animations are only kind of for basic explanation only, but there's a solid slab gate, parallel expanding gate, and a split gate. And I don't know, but I know that the majority of the gate valves we're using are a slab gate on these high pressure wells. Okay, and on lower pressure wells, I've been told that they use something like this, those mechanical gates, valves that are mechanically wedged, kind of. So this type of gate, so we'll say I've been told these are lower pressure valves typically. This type of gate is straightforward. You close the gate, the 2-piece slide, okay? So you've got this is your handle or your shaft is pushing it forward. It engages. When it gets down there, basically what it does is this lower piece slides by, or there's a mechanically, it wedges these 2 pieces apart, and it makes them grow, so then they seal on the seal faces, here and here. So mechanically they're wedged in to create a seal. And as you can see, the gates are not going to be, they're probably thinner, not as strong, blah, 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 all that stuff. So, but once they're sealed, they're pressured, and they're pretty stable. They're not, vibration and impacts and stuff. It doesn't break the seal. It doesn't let gas get by them. So again, I've been told that these are typically in the lower pressure, like 2,000-3,000 PSI valves is how that works. So you can see the wedge expands, seal, say there's pressure under here. Under where it says wedge there somewhere, and then the seal. But a slab gate valve, which is, as has been explained to me, is a typical higher pressure valve. What it does is it really uses, here's the slab moving open, so now we've got vent, and here it is closing again. But what happens is when you close it, the pressure from the well pushes up, and it pushes this slab up against the seal faces here. So it actually uses the pressure. So the harder the well pushes, the harder it pushes to seal, which is great. That's why these high pressure valves, and it's big and thick and heavy, strong, this slab, so it works really good. But they use that pressure to seal. And so when we look at what happens if I was to um, drop a plunger and well, here we go. So now you understand how the gates move. So let me back up. But I get the question, if I drop the plunger, I will damage the gate valve. Well, I hear this all the time. We talk about it, and I've dropped tens of thousands of plungers. I've never had a problem with the gate valve when I've done it in the process that I've done it. There's never been marks. It's a big, heavy piece of material, so that shouldn't even be an issue. And anyways, even if you score or scratch or dent the surface in the center of the gate, it's not the seal surface. You won't bend or deform the gate again. I mean, this stuff is big and thick and heavy, so it's nothing to worry about. The risk to your person outweighs the incredibly low chance you could ever harm or damage the valve in this process, because the key is making that plunger move so you know that it's clear, there's no trap pressure. This is all about making sure you can identify any potential issues in that well before you remove that cap. Okay, so here's the issues with the slab gate, and again, these are high pressure valves. So when you're not running a plunger lift, there's very few concerns around the slab gate. It works, it's simple, they're strong, they're thick, heavy gate can take a lot of force. Issue arises when you have a low pressure under the gate. So we have a 10,000 PSI well. It was a big well at one time. We got all these slab gates. Well, now 5 or 6 or 7 years later, we're putting plunger lifts on, and we still got the 10,000 PSI gate valve on there, of course, but now we don't have the pressure that's pushing up under that gate to, of course it seals. It's probably got enough pressure to always make it seal. But what happens if we hit it like with a little hammer, and which a plunger would be, and when it smacks down, it actually can break the seal, let gas come around that gate, and sometimes they don't reseal again. They'll just actually, once they unseat, they'll just blow, and the only way to seat them again is to actually open them fully and close them again to get them to reset. And I've had that happen a couple of times in my life, and that's why I've got this process that I do now. But when that gas comes around, it blows the plunger out, and hopefully you're not in the line of fire, but it goes way up in the air and bounces off your truck or lands in the ditch somewhere or in the dirt. And anyways, it's not a good situation. So you've got this potential on a high, basically a really high pressure valve that you feel safe. But man, if you drop a plunger on it, you could accidentally get an instantaneous release, and it could be catastrophic, dangerous. So, and then here's the other thing. So you say, okay, well, I don't have low pressure, so I'm really not worried about it. I mean, I got 600 or 700 pounds underneath my valves, and so I mean, even if the plunger hits it, it's not going to pop it. I wouldn't take that chance regardless, but we'll just say that's the mindset. But we got two master valves. So here we've closed both these master valves. Well, I've got 500 or 600 PSI in the well. That bottom master valve was holding great. My upper master valve, because that's usually the one we're going to use first to close and stuff, so it's probably got a little more erosion or wear or damage, and it slowly leaks. So we've bled off this lubricator, and the vent is venting. Well, meanwhile, we've lost a bunch of pressure between basically this gate here and this gate. So we got 500 PSI down here under this gate, and then this pressure's bled off. Now we only got 50 PSI trapped under this gate. So I think, oh, I've done a great job. This is all bled off. Everything's pretty stable. And I spin the top off, and as I reach in for that plunger or shaking the wellhead, that plunger drops. Whack, hits that gate down here, unseats it. Now I've got this trap 50 or 100 PSI of pressure right in between these 2 points. And the same thing happens. It pops and boop, blows that plunger back up into my face. So dual master valves actually can create this even though you have high pressure, because you can lose that pressure in between them. So this is always why I let the plungers go to the top of the master valve, and then I remove it using a pulling tool, a proper pulling tool that locks onto the plunger off the top of the gate, because I don't want to try and if I got it in the catcher and I'm trying to use a, so say it's a GS fish neck or an internal fish neck, and I'm trying to push something in to latch onto it to pull it out, and it slides out. Or even as any plunger, if I can't physically grab that fish neck and pull it out, and I got to use something to fish it out, I have a chance of pushing it out. Or even just working on the wellhead and shaking it and vibrating it, if that spring's in bad shape, that plunger's gone and it's going to hit the bottom, and it can happen. I've had this happen many times, and out of probably 200 or 300 times where, well, I don't even know if I would say it's that often because I stopped my process, but let's say after 20 or 30 times of trying to having where the plunger slipped out, and before I changed my process and I make sure I drop it to the bottom, there was a few times out of that 20 or 30 times where it actually did pop the plunger out. And the last time it shot it out so hard, there's a little building over top, and it blew the plunger right through the roof of the building. So, I've always pretty smart, never was in the line of fire, but it was so easy to get hurt that we said, hey, I got to do something different here because I can't trust this stuff. And so we did stop. Or this is how I do it. This is how I train all our guys. We typically try to do this. So anyways, there's another concern. Now, we've gone through all those steps, but now we got to put the plunger back in. Now here's where it's kind of different. So when I'm replacing the plunger, it can be just as dangerous. So you never put your body in the line of fire. The first thing is, if a quick trip or a valve plunger, you have a quick trip or a valve plunger that has a little valve in it, close the valve. Don't put it in the wellhead with the valve open, okay? Because in this case, what we're going to do is, the risk of having the plunger follow the catcher is still there when we're replacing it. What's different is we're actually going to be latched onto the plunger. We're going to set it into the lubricator. We're going to set that catcher good and strong, and we're going to just give it a, hold onto it and give it a little pull, and pull 20 or 30 pounds on it. If that plunger doesn't move, pull up or move, it's telling you that that spring's pretty good shape. So then we would set it in and lock it in place, and I feel much more safe because now I've done a bit of a test to prove that the catcher is still in good shape. Now, if I pull that out right away and it doesn't hold, or I'm using a pad plunger or a brush plunger or something like that where the catcher doesn't really engage anything or might not engage anything, you may have to just take it and go right down to the gate. Never leave it in the catcher if it can slip out of there. So I put it down the gate and I'll set it down, and if you have a proper catcher pulling tool, you can just release it and nothing gets banged or nothing. But anyways, I've confirmed that it'll hold. I feel good. I've got the catcher set, and then I put all my tops on, close all my vents, my needle valves, and then I pressure up. Typically when I'm pressuring up, I always kind of pressure up from the wing valve back first. And I usually do that just because if I forgot to close a needle valve or whatever, there's not a lot of pressure usually there, but you'll hear it, and you can close the wing valve easy, and you don't have any concerns. Then once I've let that pressure up backflow from the wing valve into the lubricator, then I will close the wing valve fully. Then I will open up my lowest master valve if I have a dual. Lowest master valve first, fully out of the way. Then I will open up my upper master valve, slowly let everything equalize, open it up fully, and then I'll release the plunger from that point. Okay. The other thing you can do, and actually I recommend doing this every time, is I like to pour a little bit of fluid into the lubricator before I put the plungers in. And if the valve's closed, and even after all of your safe steps you've tried, for some reason that plunger falls out of the lubricator, if it hits that fluid, it'll almost come to a stop and just slowly go down. So it won't act like a hammer. It won't hit it. But if you have that big valve open in the bottom of your plunger, it's going to hit that fluid and just go, it won't slow down barely at all. That's why I say close the quick trip valve. And then, and I do things like I'll pour in things like windshield washer fluid. Especially if you're in a northern climate like I am, you can put the -40 windshield washer fluid in. It's basically a alcohol base. There's not really an environmental issue. If you get splashed on you, it's not really a concern. Much different than methanol. Never want to use methanol. I know there's lots of times there's methanol sitting on location, but you drop that plunger and you get splashed and covered with methanol, and it's actually very dangerous. It can screws up your liver. You actually need to get you got to get that off you and clean up. So methanol is not the proper, and not to mention you get it in your eyes, it would burn. So never use methanol. If you can use windshield washer fluid or water or anything that's not going to soak in through your skin and be dangerous, it's better than that. So once you pour that fluid into the lubricator, even a few inches, you've got that, and then you put the plunger in. It's going to be as safe as you possibly can. So anyways, I hope you got something out of this. This time of year with Gapple and gas injected plunger lifts and the cold temperatures and stuff, we're dealing with hydrates and ice and wax and all sorts of things that are going to really could create situations where you can trap pressure. So no matter how your company wants you to do it, number one is never be in the line of fire. Never look down that top of that lubricator. And always, if there's any doubt that you don't know what's going on, you don't know if there's a hydrate or whatever, follow the procedures that your company has to break hydrates or whatever, and check again to make sure that pressure's gone. We, you know, every year we hear of several close calls. Luckily, nothing where anybody's been hurt seriously in the past little while. But there's just usually those close calls are caused by skipping steps and being in a rush. Anyways, work safe, and thanks for watching.